America laughed. But behind that laughter, a child was dying a little each day. His name was Gary Coleman, the tiny boy with the giant smile who ruled television in the late 1970 seconds. Every week, millions tuned in to Different Strokes to hear him say 6 words that became part of pop culture. What you talking about, Willis? It looked like the perfect American dream, a rich white man adopting 2 black boys, a mansion filled with laughter, and a nation pretending that racism could be solved with a punchline. But fame can be cruel, especially when it comes too early. While the world watched a star being born, doctors were fighting to keep him alive. At 4 years old, Gary had already endured 3 surgeries, 2 kidney transplants, and a lifetime sentence of dialysis. Steroids stunted his growth, leaving him trapped inside a child's body long after his childhood was gone. He became a millionaire before he learned what peace felt like. He made the world laugh even as he struggled to breathe. This isn't just the story of a celebrity. It's the story of a boy who gave America its favorite line and paid for it with his life. So before we remember the laughter, let's face the silence that followed. Gary Coleman came into the world already fighting for his life. The 8th of February 1968, Zion, Illinois. His biological mother was homeless, and within 4 days of birth, he was placed in the arms of Sue and Willie Coleman, a nurse and a lab technician who wanted a child more than anything. But the doctors had grim news. 1 kidney was dead, the other was dying. Before Gary turned 5, he had endured 3 surgeries, 2 transplants, and more hospital rooms than playgrounds. The medicine that kept him alive also took something away. Steroids swelled his face, stopped his growth, and froze his body in a state of eternal childhood. At school, other kids picked him up like a doll laughing, spinning him around. He hated it. He wanted to scream, "I'm not your toy." But inside that small frame was a spark, a performer's fire that illness couldn't dim. When Gary saw his cousin earning money modeling clothes, he told his mother he wanted to do the same. They wrote a letter to Montgomery Ward asking for a chance. Weeks later, he was on a runway at a local mall, walking between racks of winter coats, his eyes serious, his stride determined. Someone in the crowd noticed. A mall manager introduced Gary to a local talent agent. Soon, the boy who once lived under hospital lights was standing beneath studio lights, modeling for Sears, Hallmark, McDonald's, Cracker Jack. He wasn't tall, but he stood out. Every director said the same thing. He doesn't act, he feels. That's how Norman Lear's talent scout found him during an audition for The Little Rascals. The scout called the producer that night. "You need to see this kid. He's 1 in a million." Norman Lear signed Gary to a $1,000 a month retainer. It was 1,977. Hollywood was full of bright faces, but few like his small, fragile, magnetic. He started appearing in guest roles on Good Times and The Jeffersons, quietly preparing for the part that would change his life forever. When the pilot script for Different Strokes landed on a studio desk, the casting director already knew who would play Arnold Jackson. Gary didn't even need to audition twice. For the first time, a child who had fought death would make America laugh about life, and he was ready. By the time Different Strokes premiered in 1978, America was hungry for something light, something innocent to hold on to. The country had seen Watergate, Vietnam, inflation, and distrust. Then came a sitcom about love across color lines, a white millionaire who adopts 2 black boys from Harlem. At the center of it all was Gary Coleman, barely 10 years old, just under 4 feet tall, and carrying a nation's attention on his small shoulders. From the first episode, he didn't just act, he owned the screen. His timing, his eyes, his pauses every moment felt real. And when he said, "What you talking about, Willis?" it wasn't just a line, it became a national echo. Kids repeated it in school hallways. Comedians built entire sketches around it. The phrase landed on t-shirts, lunchboxes, cereal boxes. In just a year, Gary went from a hospital patient to the most famous child in America. He was earning $70,000 a week, more than the president made that year. Producers built special dressing rooms for him to accommodate his dialysis schedule. He was a kid actor with a medical chart thicker than his script. But no one cared about that part. They only wanted the laugh. On the set, Gary was treated both like a star and like a product. Every cue had to be perfect, every line marketable. His co-stars Todd Bridges, Dana Plato, and Conrad Bain often described him as both joyful and exhausted. Todd later said, "Gary worked harder than any adult I'd ever met, but he was still a child pretending to be fine. The success of Different Strokes turned him into a pop icon. He won the NAACP Image Award and the People's Choice Award, becoming a symbol of black excellence in mainstream media. For many black families, seeing Gary on TV wasn't just entertainment, it was representation. A little black boy could be the heart of America's living rooms. But under the glow, cracks were forming. Gary's health continued to decline. The long hours, the stress, the media attention, they all took a toll. His parents managed his earnings, and soon money became a quiet tension inside the house. Every contract, every appearance, every photo had a price tag. When Different Strokes moved into its later seasons, the laughter on set grew thinner. Gary's jokes still landed, but his eyes had changed. He had seen too much the way adults smiled at him on camera, then argued over his income when the lights went out. By 1985, the once perfect sitcom family was fading. Dana Plato was battling addiction. Todd Bridges faced legal trouble. And Gary, though still the show's center, felt trapped in a child's role that no longer fit his age or spirit. He wanted to play men, not mascots. He wanted to be taken seriously. But Hollywood only saw a forever child, and in that misperception, the seeds of tragedy began to grow. When Different Strokes was cancelled in 1986, Gary Coleman was barely 18. The applause that once filled every studio was replaced by silence, a silence he didn't know how to live with. Hollywood moved on. America found new faces to laugh at, but Gary couldn't find a way to grow out of the character the world had built for him. He wanted to play adults, to tell real stories, to prove that his worth wasn't measured by a catchphrase. Instead, casting directors smiled politely and said, "We just don't see it." He was trapped a grown man in a child's body, typecast by the very image that made him famous. He'd walk into meetings, and producers would still call him Arnold. He'd walk out feeling invisible. By the late 80 seconds, the tension with his parents had turned poisonous. They managed every dollar he earned, and Gary began to notice that his accounts didn't match the millions he was promised. In 1989, he filed a lawsuit against his parents and former business manager, accusing them of stealing over $1 million from him. They countersued for defamation. What followed was not a family fight. It was a public autopsy of trust. The headlines were cruel. Child star sues parents for greed. Every talk show wanted his tears. Every reporter wanted a quote. But Gary gave them nothing except the truth. In 1993, after years in court, he won. The judge awarded him $1.3 million. But the victory felt hollow. He had proven his point, but lost his family. He once said, "I didn't just lose money. I lost a childhood I can never buy back." Depression came like a storm. Gary tried to take his own life twice, overdosing on sleeping pills. When asked later why he did it, he simply said, "Because I was tired of being a headline." The world that once loved him now mocked him. Tabloids followed him through parking lots. Fans demanded autographs in grocery stores. He couldn't escape the version of himself that America wanted to remember. In 1998, things hit another low. While working as a security guard, a woman mocked his height and demanded a signature. Gary snapped, he hit her. The incident made national news. He was charged with assault, ordered to pay her hospital bills, and forced into anger management classes. A year later, he declared bankruptcy. The medical bills, legal fees, and court battles had drained everything. He was no longer America's favorite kid. He was a man trying to survive in a world that didn't forgive small mistakes or small bodies. Still, somewhere inside, the performer remained. In 2003, he made headlines again, this time running for governor of California. It was part satire, part desperation, part hope. He finished 8th out of 135 candidates. He didn't win, but for a brief moment, Gary Coleman reminded America he was still here. And maybe that was the victory he needed, not to be adored, just to be seen. When Gary Coleman smiled on television, America saw innocence. But when he cried in real life, America turned away. The irony was impossible to ignore. Different Strokes had been created to make people believe that love could cross color and class. On screen, a white millionaire adopted 2 black boys from Harlem, promising that kindness could erase centuries of inequality. But off-screen, the same country that laughed with Gary never truly saw him as equal. He was adored, but not protected. In many ways, Gary's story was the American dream turned inside out. He was proof that talent could lift a poor black child into the nation's heart, but also proof that fame could destroy him just as fast. Hollywood loved his charm, but never built a space for his adulthood. When he grew older, the roles stopped coming. When he spoke up, they called him difficult. When he broke down, they called him tragic. Media outlets turned his pain into entertainment. They followed his bankruptcy like a sport, his depression like a scandal. Talk shows booked him for laughs, not for healing. It was the same cycle that swallowed many black stars before him, celebrated when shining, forgotten when dim. For the black community, Gary represented something deeper. He was a child who carried the burden of being both beloved and belittled. His success told young black kids that they could make it, but his suffering reminded their parents what the system really does to them. The industry gave him money but took his peace. It gave him fame but stole his identity. Across the world, his name became shorthand for the child star curse. But for Americans who remembered the 1,980 seconds, it was more than that. It was a mirror held up to the nation, showing how easily it could consume the joy of a black boy and leave him empty. When Gary died in 2010, the tributes were short, the questions longer. Some fans mourned the loss of their childhood icon. Others quietly asked, how did we let this happen again? Even now, documentaries and retrospectives struggle to explain the contradictions. How could a country that once built its laughter around him also build the loneliness that ended him? How could a show meant to teach compassion ignore the cruelty behind the curtain? Maybe that's the truth America doesn't want to face, that Gary Coleman wasn't just a victim of fame, but a reflection of the very society that created him. A society that loves its symbols but fears its truths. And in that way, Gary's story isn't just about one man. It's about a nation that still hasn't learned the difference between watching someone live and helping them survive. By the spring of 2010, Gary Coleman was no longer a headline. He was living quietly in Utah, far from Hollywood, far from the laughter that had once defined him. Neighbors described him as polite but distant, a man who carried the weight of being remembered for something he no longer recognized. Then came May 28. He slipped, fell down the stairs, and hit his head a 1-inch gash that would end his life. Doctors said it was a brain hemorrhage. 2 days later, his ex-wife, Shannon Price, removed him from life support without consulting his family. Just like that, the voice that had once filled living rooms across America went silent. He was 42 years old. The news broke, and for a few hours, America remembered. Clips from different strokes flooded social media. Fans wrote, "Rest easy, Arnold." But soon, the noise faded again. No public funeral, no grand farewell. Only questions about the fall, about Shannon, about the years no one had cared to ask about. His friends whispered suspicions that maybe he hadn't just fallen, that maybe the pain had followed him to the end. But the world moved on. Hollywood didn't build statues for child stars who broke too soon. Still, something of Gary lingered. His face remained on old VHS tapes, reruns, and the collective memory of a generation who grew up believing that joy could fit inside a 30-minute sitcom. Every time someone replays, "What you talking about, Willis?" they hear not just the laughter, but the echo of everything it cost him. Gary Coleman's legacy isn't about wealth or awards, it's about what his life revealed. That fame, without care, is cruelty. That a nation can adore someone and still abandon them. That laughter is not love. For the black community, his story remains a cautionary tale, a reminder of how the world often wants black joy without black pain, the smile without the story behind it. And yet, there is grace in how he endured a boy who should have died young but chose to live long enough to make the world laugh. Maybe that's why, even in his silence, he still speaks. His life says, "Be kind to those who carry your happiness." Because sometimes the smallest bodies hold the heaviest truths. Some stories end without closure. But dignity doesn't need applause. To anyone who has ever stood alone in the dark after the lights went out, we see you. We remember you. And somewhere, maybe Gary's laughter still lives not as a joke, but as a heartbeat that refuses to stop.